our next speaker is Benda, and Benda will come at this from a slightly different context and perspective, but hopefully to add some dissonance to our discussion.
Thank you, Robert, and I'm grateful for those who have come before me. I will start simply by stating that I'm very aware of the conceptual and discursive complexities around both Christianity and complicity. So I'm not trying to make something that is complex simple. And we can think about those complexities maybe later in the discussion. I want to pay tribute to the voices of wisdom and the minds of expertise who have spoken before me and spoke about a context I'm not always entirely familiar with. So I have been asked to speak about a context and the time that I'm more familiar with. But this is not a distraction, nor is it a deflection. In her collection of essays entitled Between the Past and the Future, Hannah Arendt lamented the lack of tradition, a tradition of thinking on interconnected political events. And she used the work of two French thinkers. The first was René Char's aphorism, "Our inheritance was handed down to us without a testament." And the second is from Alexis de Tocqueville, when he says that since the past no longer throws its light upon the future, the mind of people wanders in darkness. One might argue that one of the laziness of Christianity and Christian theology maybe is failing to provide a tradition of thinking robustly and consistently about intersection between the Christian faith and the systematic life-ending conflict. So hopefully by reflecting on the role and the place and the complicity of Christianity in the genocide against Rwanda and Tutsi in 1994, I might be able to shed some light on this darkness. I experienced the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda in 1994 as a Christian, granted a lapsed Catholic and born-again Pentecostal. In a country of 7.5 million, there were approximately 7 million Christians of different denominational persuasions. And after 3 months of actual hardcore genocidal massacres, 1 million people, mostly of Tutsi ethnic minority, were dead. Without putting a percentage to it, most of these victims were Christians. Most of the killers were baptized Hutu ethnic Christians, and a great deal of the killing took place in churches. Little of this was clear during the genocide itself. It is in the aftermath that hard questions, disturbing questions began to emerge. How could this happen in a country where 95% of the people are Christians, a country which since 1943 had been dedicated to Christ the King? How could Christians kill other Christians inside Christian churches? Why was it impossible for Christian identity to assert itself over and above ethnic loyalties? Where were the church leaderships, and how could they fail to provide moral guidance and discipline in these terrible times? How, my PhD research asked later, could Islam and Muslims, who represented a mere 4% of the population, could withstand genocidal pressure better than Christianity? This outrage came powerfully through in the academic literature that proliferated after the genocide. Tim Longman dressed a 10-point act of indictment against the Christian churches in Rwanda. Tarsis Gatwa, the father of the most recent iteration of Doctor Who, produced a sobering monograph on the role of the missionary and post-colonial churches in shaping and fostering ethnic identities and ideology. I suggest that to understand this position of Christianity in the Rwandan tragedy, one must take an archaeological approach. That is to say, a going to the beginning, longue durée kind of view. And there we find what I call a congenital defects that beset the Rwandan church and the Rwandan Christianity from the beginning. After all, as Rwandans say, you can only straighten a tree when it is still a sapling, and a child is spoiled early when they are still in the arms of their carers. It is in those beginnings that we find a Christian identity already torpedoed by colonial racism, racialized ethnicism, and classism. White Western missionaries never considered their Black Rwandan converts as equal. They were infantilized Negroes. Instead of challenging ethnicism with the same zeal they put in suppressing indigenous religiosity, they conveniently use ethnic cleavages at different times to gain political power base and economic assets. Biblical narratives and indigenous mythologies were sometimes aligned to validate class hierarchies and sociopolitical injustices. Complicity manifested itself in the guise of unholy compromise with colonial ideology, conflation of evangelization and civilization, reciprocal co-option of political and religious elites. And this led, in my opinion, to a sort of theological mutism and pastoral delinquency during episodic political conflicts, culminating in the utter abandonment and silence of 1994. As I said, 1994, hundreds of thousands of baptized Christians, including members of Protestant Catholic clergies, men and women, killed 1 million Christians. Millions stood by and did little to help. Churches became abattoirs, graveyards, and later on genocide memorials. Some Christians tried to help and were killed. Others tried to help and succeeded, at times in circumstances defying human comprehension. However, here, like in other previous genocides, those who tried to help were a laughable minority. Yet for all this bleak tableau, the most damaging feature of Christianity's complicity in the genocide of 1994 is the decision of church leaders to vacate the arena. In the words of Father Andre Siwamana, we were all left alone with our consciences. Or to paraphrase Psalm 11, verse 3, all the foundations of law and order were being pulverized, and there was no one to tell the faithful how to act righteously. There was no pastoral voice, no counter-narrative to genocide ideology, no calls to resistance. Fear was a real factor. It is a pervasive feature of transgressive and performative atrocities. But more troubling, I'm afraid, was a deeper truth that there was not enough love to risk one's life for one's flocks. The brand of Christianity historically produced in Rwanda had seen to that potential for passivity, if not indifference. Solidarity had a limit. Christianity does not always entail martyrdom, and seeing another person's mortality has a way of making one's life even more precious. So let me finish by a couple of reflections from two works recently published on Christianity and complicity in genocide in Rwanda. In their work exploring the complicity of the churches, Rittner, Roth, and Whitworth came to this troubling conclusion that when it comes to acts of genocide or genocides, the existence of churches and Christians offers no guarantees whatsoever. And Peter Dennis reports these words from a young Tutsi survivor. We used to think that priests and nuns played the role of God and that the church was a sacred place. Now we know better. Now we know that they are like everybody and everything else. So as Christian theologian and other people gathered here are attempting to respond to the call of the Christians in Palestine, sympathetic to the historical plight of the Israeli people, these are questions we have to ponder. Are we like everybody and everything else, or does our faithful work offer some guarantee? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benda, for that very provocative presentation. Especially moved by the last part where you consider the fact that Christianity in that context offered no guarantees. And we've heard already similar themes regarding the absence of faith, the hiding of God's faith. And maybe that's another theme that we can pick up later on in our discussion or in the plenary as well.